Welcome to the pilot episode of Church is Stupid. And this is the part where I thought you guys were actually going to start chanting Church is Dumb.
Oh, Church is dumb.
So
Church is
I was a
dumb.
little bit
Church is
afraid.
dumb.
This is why
Don't
we
actually believe that. This is a disclaimer.
So yes, going into a little bit of why we started this podcast. Just for my background, my name is Ruth. I'm a pastor serving in the United Methodist Church currently, and I have had a hard time with church my whole life because I love Christ, I love Scripture, I love Christianity, but I've struggled to really find a place in church. Is that a fair summary for you guys as well?
Always.
Similar, yeah, I would say.
And just for some background, I'm 27, so I'm a young pastor serving in the church, and so part of my heart for starting this isn't necessarily to be like, oh, look at how dumb church is, we hate church, blah, 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 blah. But it's actually to talk about how even though there are things that definitely are kind of dumb that the church does, that the ultimate message of Christ is what stands out. And that's why I became a pastor, because one day I was angry, and I was walking through Spring Arbor, where I went to college, and I was really upset with the administration and how the church was running itself, and so I was kind of yelling at God and was like, God, what are you going to do to fix your church? Come on, it's so stupid. And God said, well, Ruth, what are you going to do? And yeah, so, gosh, how many years has that been? Oh, geez, that was 2012. 8 years later, here I am.
There you go.
In my fourth year. Don't even make that face, Andy. I don't even want to see that.
8
You guys
years
don't
ago,
understand.
I'm like barely getting into high school.
You're so mean. And so joining us here today with a little bit of their background, was that a fair synopsis of why we're here, what we're doing?
I think a little bit, and we can talk about it
Yeah,
after
that's
we give
totally
a
fair.
little introduction.
Yeah. We'll smooth out the rough edges
That's
as
the
we
nice
go
way
on.
of saying, no, Ruth, you sucked at it.
No, I was.
No, you did great. It's the first time. We're all a little bit nervous about this.
I think we're all completely unsure of everything that we're doing right now, but we're going for it, and I think it's going to be a good time.
Brought up this idea. Somebody said yes, and now we're here with a full setup, and we're ready to go.
Yeah, it's crazy how this full setup just materialized right here, and now we're just using
You know,
it.
I was on vacation. And it
Materialized,
just showed
stolen
up.
from other areas, bought, purchased.
All of these are loose terms. It's fine.
It didn't come from nowhere. Just need to put that one out there.
You know, I do
We
have
stole way too many things.
I do have a master's of divinity, so, you know. Whoa. No.
That's not how that works. We all know it.
No.
Okay,
Okay,
I will go.
let's
I'll take
go,
over. Hi.
We're going
I
around the table.
am Andrew Hahn, and I am a PK. That's my background and why my opinion matters here. I'm
And a
also-
disc.
Okay, a disc. For those of you that don't know these acronyms, a PK is a pastor's kid. I know a lot of us, and a lot of us are happening to be troublemakers, which is really odd because, raised in the church.
How does
Yeah.
it work, huh? You never would suspect.
Never would have
Never,
suspected.
For the record, this is Ruth again. I also am a pastor's kid, so I can say that because my dad is also a pastor.
I'll be honest, your voice is not the one they are going to have that anybody.
I know. I'm like, oh, can you tell who the female is in this conversation?
Yes, and a disc is a district superintendent kid. Yeah, those are those acronyms. I'm also a youth who has participated in several different Christ-led organizations, volunteered at summer camp. Those are my religious backgrounds, but as far as who I am a super senior at Michigan State University studying broadcast journalism, which has been an interesting path, but I'm done with all my main classes, and now all I have is electives, so I'm taking a lot of interesting classes.
The sarcasm was real hard there.
No, they're interesting. They're just...
I hope your professors are listening right now.
Yeah, I'm never giving this link to any one of them. Yeah, please check out the pilot episode where I completely throw you under the bus.
By calling a class interesting with a little bit of
Little bit of an
suspicion, and that's it.
Would you like to say?
Well, yeah, I'll go ahead with my introduction now. It's not going to be as flashy as the other two, but my name is Elijah Vandersandy, and I am very happily married to who you heard from first, Ruth Vandersandy.
It's not Andy.
It's
just
not
in
Andy.
case you
It's
were
Ruth.
curious.
Sorry, Andy.
was really hopeful.
I come from a charismatic church background. I was part of a very large youth group when I was younger, and I ended up attending Spring Arbor University for a year where I met Ruth. I only attended for 1 year, but Ruth and I continued on afterwards, and eventually we started dating, and we became engaged, and then we got married, and now I am the proud father of an amazing daughter named Lily. So my current status right now is being a stay-at-home father for her, and learning how to raise a kid still a year in. So,
But you're also a pastor's spouse.
that's true.
Which is
Yes.
a different perspective.
My my interesting perspective, I suppose, will come from, I think, the difference in my background while also being the spouse of a pastor, and to put it blatantly, a female pastor no less, which is a little more rare in I would say Western churches right now.
Well, shockingly, there's not a lot of, I was 23 when I started ministry, so
Yeah.
23-year-old female pastors weren't exactly, flying off the shelves.
Yeah. Regardless of whether or not they should be rare or not, the reality is that they are. So
That's Elijah's nice way of saying, Ruth, I wish you would. No, I'm just
no, it's not. Don't listen to her.
just for some background, both me and Andy, I'm speaking for you, you're welcome, have more of a United Methodist background.
That's right. Yeah.
Whereas Elijah, basically his first experience, I think, even really in a United Methodist church was when we got married. Or at least when I moved into the area.
At the very least, any that I can remember, because, I mean, when I was younger, we would visit churches or have trips or go to a service that, like, a family friend would go to, and I don't really remember them, but I remember having limited experience out of anything outside of non-denominational charismatic churches. That's my background.
Absolutely. And so we're going to be having different people pop in and out of these. So sometimes it will be Andy and Elijah. Sometimes it'll be some other people. But you're stuck with me. You're welcome.
Well, I was just going to say, our range of subjects may also be a little bit, restrained just because of COVID, and we're keeping COVID safe here. Follow all the rules that we have been given, I guess, for this podcast at the very least.
Yep. We'll see what happens for the next ones.
Do we want to talk a little bit more about the purpose of the podcast, and then maybe delve into our subject through that, maybe?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, let's go for it.
Because we went over Ruth gave a brief introduction, of the pilot title of the podcast. Ruth
is stupid.
Church sucks. Excuse me.
No, it's church is stupid.
Church is stupid.
Yeah, pay attention for the knockoff version of this called Ruth is Stupid, hitting stores near you probably a couple of years from now when we're famous. And
it's in the works, but it's very early in its development, that's for sure. Yeah.
We're all definitely in this for the fame.
We definitely have a list of subject matter, though, so that's not the problem.
Oh, my gosh.
But Church is Stupid being the pilot title of said podcast, Ruth gave a little brief description of why we chose that and what it's going to entail. But I think diving a little bit deeper into that, we can start to go over, Ruth, if you maybe want to, Ruth or Andy, if you want to.
Do you want me to hop in here?
Maybe,
I feel like he didn't know
Sorry,
how
I'm
to
still
end
learning.
that sentence.
I didn't.
I
I had an idea in my head if I was going to end that, but then I realized, I'm bringing up a subject that I actually don't know the answer to, and that resulted in me saying,
I'm actually interested to hear Andy's perspective.
Well, actually,
yes.
My perspective is very interesting because.
Oh wow! So you're really interesting. Is that what you're saying?
Oh, I really wish. So basically, many moons ago, Ruth came to me with this idea of a podcast.
Dun, dun, dun.
Which started the discussion about a church-based podcast. What is that going to entail?
Yep.
But realistically, what it entails is a conversation about the problems that we have and it pushing people away.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, the church isn't really about all of those problems or issues that are had via the door being closed or just not enough money in an area or a church closing or accidentally turning people away, but we're supposed to be about truly living our lives the way that God intended through a God framed point of view. but we have a lot of these issues, which are what we're going to talk about, and hopefully in conversations about some of these issues, we can push past them and get into a deeper meaning of conversation about how we can deal with understanding these issues, as well as, I'm just going to introduce our topic for the today
Sure,
and
yeah.
hopefully give an example.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Our topic for today is pews.
Pew, 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 pew,
Pews.
pew.
Which is an interesting one, because you would think that these objects that you just sit on in church wouldn't be that controversial of a thing. But, I mean, have you ever sat on one?
Oh my gosh, seriously. And yeah, so
I will say, comfortability. Was that a word?
Comfortability?
I think that's the word, yeah.
The comfort level of pews ranges from extremely, extremely terrible, why does this exist, to, oh my gosh, I could sleep on this.
See, I've never had that.
Yeah, I was
second
like,
one.
where have you
I've
been
had some
going?
before. I mean, I think that they're rare, but I mean, there's definitely a spectrum of comfort level when it comes to pews, in my opinion. That's not what we're talking about today. I don't know why I brought that up. I thought it would be
could
fun.
be.
It could
We
be.
could end
I'm
up
just
there.
saying. And,
Maybe it'll tie in later. I don't know.
as somebody who knows you, I also know you can sleep almost anywhere.
That's
to be
why.
fair,
Your
it's-
stipulations for a
yeah.
bed is way lower than ours.
It's very true.
See, the older I get, the less and less I want to try to contradict you on that, because I think
he's
you're right.
learned that I'm
I
always
can't,
right.
I think I can sleep mostly anywhere. Yeah.
But yeah, I think, thank you, Andy, for your perspective. I definitely agree with you. And I know that it's not everybody's experience that they've walked into a church and it hasn't been. I think that it is a very common one, though, where we feel there are just these things that end up being so important in churches that just don't need to be. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's kind of the heart of where we came. So we don't say that to be like, oh, all churches are the worst. And if that wasn't your experience in a church, that's awesome. That's so wonderful. That's not why we're here. We're just offering the opportunity to have conversation about some of our experiences and some of the other people that we'll have on over time, our experiences with things that we can lovingly look back on and say, okay, church can be really stupid sometimes. Just like one of my favorite things about mine and Elijah's relationship is that we are very great at just looking at each other and being like, that was stupid.
Yeah.
But it doesn't
Yes.
change the
Yes.
fact that we love each other. Or so he thinks. No, but it doesn't change that. It's because we have such a deep, intimate relationship that we're able to look at it and say, okay, no, this thing is stupid, and want each other to be better.
Yeah.
And is that also a little bit?
Yep, and I just want to provide a quick disclaimer. All of these viewpoints that are being provided are pretty much our own. There may be
Yes.
times that we're providing devil's advocate opinions
Absolutely.
or
Yeah,
things like
absolutely.
that. We are not promoting that this is the idea of the church that we all attend, or that
Yep.
this is a problem that we see in specific churches.
Yep.
We're not trying to call out you individually for having your pew on Sunday morning that you sit in
Absolutely
every
not,
day.
no.
But we're saying, what
No.
happens if you
No, we're
expand
not.
from that
We're not.
pew and go and sit next to that family that you've never spoken to? And I know it's a lot harder with COVID,
Yeah.
but yes, we're trying to say, what if,
Yeah.
that kind of a
Yeah.
thing. And we're not trying to say everything you've done your entire religious life is wrong. That's not what we're
Yes,
trying to say
no.
at all. So just know that.
And there are amazing, wonderful, very great churches that get caught up on really silly things. And that doesn't make them any less awesome and any less godly. It just makes it an interesting thing to talk about.
Yeah.
So back to pews. Pews, man. I hate pews. So that's mostly because I literally, you guys are like looking at me like I'm crazy.
No,
and
I
totally
want to
accept
hear
that.
both of your, if you have any starting opinions on the concept or literal pews. I want to hear your opinions first, if you even have them.
I didn't know there were churches that didn't have pews until I was probably an adult.
When you say don't have pews, they have different types of seating?
Yeah.
Or, okay. I was going to say, just standing arrangement.
oh, we're gonna
That's a
get
different
to that.
church, and I love, okay.
We gonna
Hillsong
get there.
in Australia has, a small section where...
Is it like a
they're-
mosh pit?
Eventually, there's certain...
Eventually.
No.
It always
So-
becomes one.
Dun, dun,
Those
dun.
Yeah,
Australians.
so a couple years ago, we went to visit Wesley, my brother, in Australia. And he showed us the youth worship night. I forget the exact name of it, so I apologize. But basically, that night, like, I'm not even sure if there were chairs at some point, but it was just a crazy time of praising God and dancing around, and they would play different songs, and all of Hillsong's songs have the clap pattern in it, which is
Sounds about right.
that's the clap pattern. It's in every
Elijah.
Hillsong song. I was doing it for your benefit and to break people's eardrums at home.
Of course,
course, yeah.
That's our real goal, actually.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. But it was just again, I don't know if there were chairs or not. I wasn't paying that much attention. I was sitting in the sound
kicked
booth
one
with
over?
Wesley. I don't think I kicked anyone over.
That's a chair, not a
Oh.
person. Well, somebody just had a Freudian
I
slip.
don't think.
I had to think through my night real quick. Did I kick a child?
You did say that it becomes a mosh
Okay,
pit,
wait.
so,
First it started with a chair, then it was a person, and now it's a child you're
Are
kicking?
you saying a child isn't a person? Ruth.
Ooh. You got me on that
So
one.
Ooh.
back to the subject of pews.
Yes.
So are you saying that you don't remember there being chairs, meaning that you weren't sure if it was a chair or if it was pews, or
No,
are
no,
you
no,
saying
no,
you
no.
don't even know if there was
I
any
don't
seating
think
at all?
there was seating. I
Okay.
think at certain points there were people sitting on the floor. There's like always not bleacher. That's not the right thing. Like more stadium-sized seating.
Fair enough.
If I
Sure,
pull up
yeah.
a picture, you guys would be able to understand a lot better.
Yeah,
But
okay.
There are no pictures involved in this because this is only our voices.
I was going to say nobody else
Um,
would know, though.
But yeah, that kind of seating, it was on the outside, which is where we were sitting, me and family, next to Wesley in the sound booth because he was doing the whole. Actually, I think he was on lights, so.
So
because
he was just
because we
flipping switches going,
can't. We literally just talked about not having visual anything. Andrew, at that moment when he made those very, very peculiar noises, seemingly was trying to intimidate being a DJ.
Intimidate, not imitate.
Imitate.
I think this is
Did I
going
say intimidating?
really,
This is
really
going
well.
very smoothly.
I'm intimidating a DJ.
As we speak, he's backing that man into a corner right now.
It's very frightening. I think he's going to kick a person,
gosh.
guys.
Oh,
If
Okay.
he,
We
if
were
he
very
kicked
clear-
over a
we're-
chair, that's one thing about pews. You could not kick over a pew.
that's true. That's true.
Like that'd be very difficult.
depends.
Andy's
Some-
thinking about it. He's like, no, I
Some
think I've
churches
kicked a
bolt
pew.
those pews into the floor
They
too.
all
Most of them do,
do.
right?
Yeah.
Well, no, actually, not all of them. I'm
Okay.
sorry.
A
They definitely
majority of
don't
them
all
do.
do, but a lot of them do.
And the reason why I know a majority of them do is because at certain points I've thought about, what if we take the pews out and play football in here? Again,
That's very
not the
difficult.
best idea.
I don't know what
But
you're
it's
talking
a
about. That
thought of
sounds
it.
amazing.
It's amazing idea.
We
That's
have
a
green
hu-
carpet in here, so it's like the same thing.
We basically have a football field.
We have
right?
astroturf in our sanctuary. Yeah.
Ayo, what if?
Future topic:
AstroTurf
No.
in this thing.
converting sanctuaries to football fields? Question mark.
All right. Pews.
Pews.
Controversy. Problems. Background. Ruth, you have some background in
Oh.
pews for us?
Wow, that was a lot of like really bad word associations that eventually got us where we wanted to go.
That's what I'm good for.
That's the real reason you were invited today, so that way you could go from kicking people to,
I'm at the tech
Actual
desk for a
pews.
reason here. Okay.
Yeah, so I spent a pathetic amount of time actually researching pews because I thought they would, and truthfully, I will admit that I thought there would be nothing to find because it's a pew. But it turns out like pews weren't even in church buildings until the Reformation. So it's all of us Protestants who
Go ahead and give a
everything.
quick too long.
So, yeah,
did
the-
not look up what the Reformation is.
Is that for you or for, no? So the
It
Reformation
was at one point.
I know. So I'll just let you explain.
Oh, okay. Yeah, just checking. So the Reformation is a time in church history. It was around like the 1500-ish times. I'm going to get that wrong and somebody's going to correct me. It's fine. When Martin Luther, who was a Catholic priest at the time, and we're talking about the medieval Catholic Church, we're not talking about the current Catholic Church, he nailed his 95 theses on the door of the church. And from this, essentially what happens is Martin Luther ends up starting his own denomination, And that is where all of the Protestant denomination, which is churches that are not the Orthodox Church or the Catholic Church, those are different denominations. Those fall under the Protestant category.
Okay.
Anyhow, so yeah, before that, there were no pews in any churches. And so they actually did have standing room only. And for the elders, there was one chair and there'd be like one table. And the chair was supposed to be this like prominent sign of status because it was the presiding elder. So imagine
Like a throne, but not technically calling it a throne almost.
ways to get my own throne. I like this.
But it'd be in the crowd, wouldn't it? So it wouldn't be as much of a throne.
Oh,
yeah, it
yes.
would be. It would
Okay.
often be in the middle of the room.
Yeah, still a prominent position.
And there'd be a
Okay,
table
okay.
for communion. But there was so much movement during the service and during the liturgy that because of that, people just didn't really sit. So I read this really funny article that was talking about how of all of the things the Reformation got rid of, so all that Martin Luther threw out, like the liturgical practices, the movement and service, he kept the really long, boring sermon. And so because of that, that was a quote from the article.
Thank you.
We have some notes for you, Mr. Luther. But no, because of that, the article said they were so bored they just wanted a place to sit. I don't think that's actually historically how it happened, but
Probably
sometimes it feels a little bit like that. I say that as a preacher who has preached some really long sermons. Andy's
real
had to
doozies.
suffer. All right, well, we didn't need to go there, man. We didn't need to go there.
They're all on the YouTube page. You can find them.
You know, I was going to say that, and maybe not now after this. No, but from there, essentially, pews became this status symbol. So, like, you would get your own box. So pews come from the word for podium, weirdly, or it was podia.
The Latin word, right?
I believe so, but I'm not looking at it right this second,
Okay.
so I could.
Because you just said the word. And I got
Yeah,
a
well, I
little
was hoping no
confused.
one would call me out on it. So
Well,
thank
I
you
did.
Thank you for that.
This is going to become a norm on this podcast, by the way.
I will harm you.
Calling each other out. Yeah, that makes
Especially
sense.
on things that I don't understand. Calling people out on things I don't get anyways.
I am perfectly fine with the words in this, being explained, like Reformation or
Yep.
that kind of thing. Providing a simple explanation for those, really great. That's a great
No, yeah, that'll...
everything.
Yeah, I mean,
So
because
Andy approves this podcast
Oh yeah,
that
by
he's
the
already
way,
on.
Our Reformations, our definitions for those, they line up pretty well.
Oh, good to know. Yeah, you were on top of that?
Yeah.
You were on top of that.
Although the date is 1517, that's the start.
1517.
Hey,
Nice.
I was in the right century.
Yeah, you were.
You did say
So,
1500s, yeah.
I feel pretty special. It helps that we celebrated our 500th year anniversary since the Reformation in
Yes, it really did.
2017, which is when I became a pastor. So that's why I know those things. He just rolled his eyes at me. It's fine. Whatever.
Getting back on track now.
You'll learn very quickly that I am the church nerd of the group who knows pathetically lame amounts of information about this stuff.
Hey, that's what we need.
But yeah, so
I think that they're very cool, but there is just a lot of info there.
that's totally fair.
So we just, yeah.
But yeah, so that's essentially it was like a special place near the opera, and it also came from a word.
We're talking about pews again.
Pews,
right.
yes.
Yeah, pews
It
were...
also came from a French word that talked about enclosed. I can't remember if it was pied or what exactly it was.
Pepe le pied.
Oh, no.
No,
Sorry.
no.
Shut it down. Cancel the whole thing.
French.
Please let this podcast never make it to France where they can make
And
fun
this
of
is
us.
where we cancel the first
We
one.
agreed.
we've
We
already
agreed
cutting it.
before we recorded that the moment one of us accidentally slipped a terrible pun, that we would just cancel and can the
I don't
entire
think it was a
thing.
terrible pun. It was well deserved.
We got a 2-3 vote here,
It,
so
it had more than 1 point of entry into the conversation.
Qu-
French and Pew.
Quite honestly, I'm just shocked it took us 23 minutes to
That's fair.
get to a pew joke.
I have to admit, Andrew, it actually was a pretty good pun. Good job.
you.
We can continue now. The French word for
But anyhow, so it was an enclosed space. So the original pews weren't just like a long bench like we know. They were actually like these stadium boxes where families would rent them out and they would like deed them to their kids.
Yep.
Because they're like, oh, look at my cool special place. I'm so awesome. And then they would give it to their kids. And like when a pew would, when somebody wouldn't have a family member to leave it to, there would be like actual fights
Yep.
over who got these these pews, and so it compared them to like stadium box seating, and it's so weird for me. One, to think of a church that people were like, I gotta be there, I can't wait, but also that the church would like sell pews.
Yeah.
And I knew that, but I never thought of them as their own little private boxes. They compared it to the equivalent of us being able to play on our iPads.
All of this
getting
coming as a result of the Reformation too, not
Yes.
being something prior to the Reformation. All of this,
So
because we're talking,
where
because
to
Pews
begin?
happened after, which I know we said earlier. I'm just recouping almost for myself,
we're good.
actually.
So it wasn't until like the 1500s.
Right, yeah.
But
Which is funny because I think nowadays most Christians know of the funny or sometimes very real like idea of a lot of churchgoers having their seat, making sure that everyone else in the church knows that is their pew and their spot, and if that gets taken, it's a really big deal. And we kind of laugh about it now, but years and years and years ago, they were actually very real status
Yeah.
symbols, and they would. I think you mentioned too, and which I'm sure you'll get to. They led to, they played a part in or led to, segregation in the sanctuary, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, and just before we get going on that, because that's a whole other era. It really wasn't that long ago. It's really easy to think because it started in the 1500s, but it really didn't go away until. Well, gosh, I didn't look up the date, so I don't know, but it was relatively recently.
Okay.
And so it kind of fits. I've been very fortunate. I've actually been able to go to Dublin twice. And I went to St. Patrick's Cathedral in Dublin. I think that's what it was called.
Question mark?
Maybe.
The one
Do we
telling the
have
story.
fact checkers for this podcast?
You're the one telling the story.
Oh crap! So I'm the fact checker. Well, I failed my own job.
Yeah.
But while I was there, I remember walking in and they had like just folding wooden chairs, and they didn't have any pews or anything. And I just thought it was so weird. Not because they didn't have pews, but they didn't even have like spots for pews. Like you said, they normally are bolted down and things like that. And it was just a big, giant, empty room that had chairs in the middle of it. And actually the place where the podium, or the pulpit, that's the word. It's not a podium, it's a pulpit.
I was going to say cockpit, but that's way off. So.
That's not quite right.
Flying
But
plane.
where the priest would speak was in the middle of the room. And at the time, I really just didn't think that much about it because there's a lot of churches now that are moving away from pews. So I sort of just thought it was part of that, but I think they probably never got them because it's a historical building. So I'm guessing they wouldn't install pews in a historical building.
That's interesting, yeah.
Having it in the middle of the room instead of having it all lines up. Everything lines up.
You got the cork board with the red
do.
line connecting all these dots.
I'm the crazy person who has the magazine cover.
I'll be honest. I have no idea where your train of thought went. Like, how did you get to it all lines up?
Because it lines up with the fact that they didn't have pews until the... Because this church would be older than the...
You're saying that the church is so historical and so old that they kept it the way that it was before the Reformation. Therefore, it never even got pews. It was always just like an empty room that maybe eventually they put chairs in to fill in space so people could sit.
So it was like kind
But
of
they
cool
never-
to after reading those articles to look back at my own experience over... Because, I mean... We're from the States. We have no history, like, for cathedrals.
Okay. Yeah,
like,
that's fair.
For really big cathedrals or anything. No, we have a lot of history, but not...
Like 300 years, but yeah.
Well,
300 years, that's about as old as the world. We're almost as old as every other country, right?
oh, my God. As a country, yes.
America, man, compared to... We're talking about the 1500s, which is still not even that long ago when you really look at how old some traditions that we're even familiar with now are. Like, America is so young when it comes to like ancient traditions and stuff like that too.
The United States of America, anyway.
Yes, yeah. Forgive me.
There was
the
a lot of
yes.
history before we got here.
Exactly. Yeah. No, and that's.
But we don't need to. Sorry, I just
No,
didn't want to
it
make
is-
sure we weren't just like,
No.
the
It
whole
is. It
history
actually. That is
started when we
definitely a
got
very
here.
important distinction that all too often I don't even think of saying that kind of things, that kind of stuff but it is an important distinction. The United States of America is very, very young, and you look at the absolute behemoth of history that the rest of the world has, especially like, in Western Europe, especially when you're talking about the church. You forget how ancient some traditions are and how many traditions have carried over and how many traditions probably haven't as well. So that's, I think, when we're talking on the surface, talking about pews can be really, really boring. But when you actually dive into the history of them and you really realize that even though today when you look at them, it's basically just a bench with cushions, the idea of them being in a sanctuary has real history and real implications too, because it wasn't always like that. And when they were implemented, it was very different, and it was a very big deal.
Well, and just like the fact that yes, they do have a long history, but they also really don't have that long of history. If you look at the whole of Christian
longer than the United States of America.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
If we use America as a basis for history,
Everything's good.
then
Yeah.
I also just looked
But
it up.
it all comes down to like what we view as normal, and then we're looking at the things we view as normal and actually looking at when they originated and how they originated. I think it's a cool distinction to look at.
I want to note it. I just looked it up. It is St. Patrick's Cathedral, and it was definitely built in 12. It says the building took from 1220 to 1259, so I was not wrong.
Oh, yeah, you're very correct.
Really afraid
You
I would
fact-checked
be.
yourself, and you're great.
Either way, so we've talked about some of the origination of pews, and we went on the tangent, like Ruth's personal experience with seeing a literal building that was built before the Reformation happened that still held that old tradition, and all of this is leading to our next point, which Ruth.
Oh, it's on me. I see. I love how
I did it again. I know.
Yeah, I love how you do all of
That
the
was done
lead-ins.
purposefully.
Like, oh yeah, hey, by the way, let's change topics. But
Well,
I don't know what
we have
it
to
is.
we have to keep the train rolling, though.
No, you're totally right. But yeah, so that's essentially where Pews started. And it was really cool, like I said, to be able to fit that with my own experience and be able to, and I would never have thought about that now I have to go to Ireland again, just so you know.
I do go to
I gotta
Ireland
go
for the
back.
first time sometime. That'd be great.
Yeah, I just leave you behind every time I go. That sounds like a joke, but it's not.
So we talked about this point a little bit, and that the topic of pews has caused some segregation.
Yes.
In the
Yeah,
church's
that's where we
history.
left off.
That's where we left off.
That's right.
I'll bring it right back.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We
See,
need
Andy, that's
you.
a good transition.
We need you to do that.
This is all I do.
Yeah.
He just
I have a little
transitions.
notebook in my brain. This is where we lost track.
And that's really impressive considering you're talking with me, who is the universal rabbit trailer.
Okay.
But
Let's
segregation.
stop rabbit trailing about
Yes.
rabbit trailing.
It's
But
so
yeah,
easy.
so then the pews became really, really popular in England, and were then brought over to the American colonies, and that's how the church structure here. So most of our churches were built with the idea of having pews in them.
Yeah.
And those were still seen as status symbols. So believe it or not, people wanted to sit in front. And that was, I know, now people sit in horror like, please not the front, anywhere but the front.
Only people you ever see in the front is
Pastors'
pastors'
families.
Yep.
And sometimes the youth will sit in the front, especially if they have to leave for children's church halfway through or something like that.
Or if they're forced
depending
to.
on where the doors are. That's another option.
Well, and honestly, so I sit in the back of every church that I walk into because I'm a terrible person. And someone asked me about it one time, and I said, "Listen, I did my time. I was a pastor's kid. I sat in the front. I'm good. I'm done."
We still sometimes do if we're visiting a church, especially if we know the pastor. As a family group, we'll either sit closer to the front, or the other goal is always to avoid somebody else's pew.
I was gonna say, have
I
you
don't wanna
ever?
accidentally sit in.
Have you ever actually? Well, we'll talk about that later. Sorry, we'll get
in a
there.
minute.
Yeah.
Because right now we're just doing the history, but we'll get to some more of our experiences with it. But yeah, so as they became status symbols and families would pay to sit up front, most of the money that funded churches at that time came from pew rentals. And came from people purchasing their pews. Yeah, right. It's weird to think about because offering is so instilled in us now.
Right.
But what happened at the time was it was also used as a way to make sure that segregation was happening. So slave owners had to rent a pew for their slaves, and they could only sit in the farthest possible place from the podium.
Good Lord.
Because that's how the structure of the church worked. The holier you were, the closer you sat to the pulpit. And then slowly, the less influential you were, the further away you had to sit. And so slaves were forced to sit in the back. And they could only do that, again, if their slave owner rented a pew for them, which is horrifying to think about.
Yeah.
Like, absolutely I don't think we talk about the church's sordid history enough,
No, we don't.
pretend like we do all of these great, nice things and that we don't have any sort of skeletons in the closet, but I just don't think that's true.
Yeah, we do.
I'm kind of curious as to something, and I didn't do any research on this. And
Shame.
I didn't do enough research on pews or anything. But thinking about certain movies that portray the time period, I think The Help is one that will portray a church in that section, like in a completely African American church and congregation. I'm trying to think like how I would discern this without like sounding like the bad guy in this situation.
Sure.
I'm fine with it. Do you think that in those churches they still charge for their pews, or was it the Phil thing? Because
So I think by that time, at least the time of The Help,
yeah, okay,
I think that the paying for your pews died out before then. So what came out of this, out of paying for pews, is slowly people started over time realizing how one of the main reasons. Sorry, I'll go back. One of the main reasons that the Reformation and Martin Luther split away from the Catholic Church was because of these things called indulgences and how they treated money. So an indulgence is basically if I wanted to punch Elijah in the face.
That's right. Yeah.
No, I
Sorry,
don't.
no,
That's right that I do.
Oh my gosh.
No.
Really
just to be
quick.
clear,
We won't spend too much
not-
time on this. Really quick. What I just did is I responded to like the idea that Ruth was talking about indulgences. So I'm
we
like,
talked
oh, okay, I'm
earlier.
remembering what you're talking about now. But the way I said it was, that's right. Immediately when she was talking about punching
Yeah,
me.
no,
Me,
So
me
it
and
didn't
Elijah
sound
might have
like that's
talked
what I-
about this before in our
Okay.
kitchen, just
Okay.
for some background. Anyhow.
No, I was remembering
So-
the concept of indulgences in the history of what you're talking about, and I was like, oh yes, I remember now, and that
So
was
that
what I was trying
Very
to say.
embarrassing moment right there.
yeah, go ahead and continue with your indulgence.
Anyways.
Just gonna talk about. So if I wanted to go and punch somebody in the face, then what would happen is I could go into the church and say, I want to do this, and I'd give them money, and they'd say, okay, you're free and clear. And so then you could punch someone in the face, and it didn't count as a sin. And so obviously that's really bad, and there is no scriptural founding for any of that, and there's much scriptures against that kind of mentality. But that's one of the main reasons. Well, maybe not the main. It was up there though. That Martin Luther wanted to split. It was one of his 95 Theses, were how awful they were. And so how ironic is it that a few 100 years later, people are paying for their pews? So finally somebody's like, well, crap. We're doing the exact same thing that we basically tried to leave the Catholic Church for doing. And again, for the record, that's the Catholic Church of the time.
Yeah.
Not now, not the current Catholic Church. They have also had a much structural changes over time.
So can I bring up a lighter note?
Oh, dear sweet goodness.
So we talk about paying for our pews. This is a concept that I had a conversation about earlier this week with my mother, and talking about the confirmation period that me and my brother went through, which is the period where we learned about the idea that you pay for your pew. And so think about this idea from the mind of like 7th grade, 8th grade boy.
I literally can't.
Paying for your pew.
It's weird to even try to place myself in those shoes.
I'm thinking more along the line of what does a pew, the pew noise it's a fart noise. So thinking about paying for your pew, it was. I'm sorry, a bad attempt at humor.
Oh no.
That was a really bad attempt at humor.
No.
I'm sorry. Maybe I didn't explain it well, but
Well,
like,
you can go like PU or something like that.
I thought you were giving us a real introspective as to what this crazy concept of paying for a right to sit somewhere seems like just like an adolescent. But you're talking about, imagine a kid hearing the words pay for pew and laughing at it. And that was the whole bit. That was it.
But you know what? That was the most 7th grade thing I think I've ever heard.
But the thing
You know
is,
what? Yeah,
you gotta
maybe.
pay for your pew and then you gotta sit in it. So
Oh no.
Why am I laughing?
I don't know why you're laughing.
it was pretty funny. I'm gonna be honest.
No. We just lost everyone that may have been listening to this.
Maybe they needed the emotional break. I needed the emotional break. Okay.
Instantly tuned out.
Now they just have emotional confusion.
I don't know.
They don't know how to feel. But yeah,
Oh my gosh.
so essentially this concept of paying for your. Now we just want another word.
Pew. It's a pew.
What else is there to say,
Paying
Ruth?
for your bench? No. Paying for the pew rose to this movement called the Free Church Movement. And if you've ever seen or heard of the Free Methodist Church, that's how they started, was because they were literally free. You could walk in the door and you did not have to pay for where you sit. And I think that now it's kind of, again, it's sort of ridiculous for us to think about having to pay for a pew, but a large part of that is because, I lost it. Nope, train of thought was gone.
Ooh.
It was there. That was
Well,
bad.
I'm gonna apprehend your train of thought
Yeah,
again
feel
for
free.
another story.
Oh gosh, please not another
Literally,
fart story.
it's not.
Oh yeah, sure.
Okay, so this is yesterday, 2 days ago, that we had Idris, my brother from Traverse City, up. And we were driving home from Myers, Walmart, one of them stores up there, and we drove past the Free United Methodist Church. And I don't remember the exact conversation, but it was along the lines of, what's the difference between the Free Methodist Church and the United Methodist Church?
Yeah.
And it may not be the only reason, but one of the reasons that we were taught in confirmation was this idea of the separation for having to pay for your pew, which to him did not seem the most believable thing. Which I don't think to any non-church goer who didn't know that you had to pay for your pew at one point.
I remember when I first heard about that,
it
it seemed like a joke.
Yeah.
I guess I think when I first heard about that, I was in a very, very non-denominational church who was very staunch on making sure that they were separated from a lot of other denominations. So I'm sure the first time I heard that concept, I was like, that's just all those other churches.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Of course, like lumping it all into one or something like that. Because it sounded so foreign and so, I don't know, antithetical to me. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and I know where I was going. The crazy thing about it is that we can still sort of see how it bleeds in because those pews do become status symbols still.
Yeah, they do.
Like where you sit in church, it's, I don't know about you guys, but I have made the mistake of sitting in somebody else's pew. And I've actually been asked to leave where I was sitting to go sit somewhere else because that's where this family sat. Or I've also had times where maybe that wasn't the case, but the family shoots you dirty looks, like the whole service. Like,
the whole service.
I want to be sitting there. Why am I not sitting there? And it's so uncomfortable. Like, I just couldn't imagine walking up to someone and be like, I'm sorry, but this is where I sit. So can you just scoodle-dee-doot on out of there? I feel like I need a ticket. I'm on an airplane. You're actually sitting in my seat. And so I think that it has kind of still permeated, even though it's silly for us to think about paying for them. I think that mentality is still kind of there. This is where my family sat. This is where my family has sat for generations. And a lot of that comes from this deep ingrained need to believe in our church buildings as a whole, not even just where we sit, but we need this building. This building is where we've been for forever.
Yeah.
And essentially relegating God into this building, and it sort of comes out through pews, which is such a weird thing, but I mean, I like sitting, so I guess I get it.
And this time of COVID also brings up a couple of other interesting points to that, because Well, for one, I'm going to stick on this in the sanctuary first,
Yep.
and then we'll go to the online portion.
Right.
When we first started doing COVID preparations here and like preparing our sanctuary for safe re-enter reuse, we marked off half of the pews with green tape. About the first Sunday that we had more individuals inside of the sanctuary, I remember hearing one person go, "Oh, thank God, they didn't mark off my pew."
Oh gosh.
Oh, really?
And I don't know how to react to that because it was
Yeah.
like a
Church isn't supposed to be any place where you have any kind of idea of ownership. Or
yeah, it's
or,
like
I don't know.
I get it though.
I wanted
It's
to say it's not that I can't relate in any way at all. It's not like it's a horrible sin or by anything to like view a place that you sit all the time as like your space. But I'm just thinking if we're going to compare or if we're going to relate that to the idea of paying for a status symbol in the sanctuary, if we're trying to relate this to that, you have to kind of talk about it. You have to talk about the idea that I think sometimes as Christians we view certain things in church as like our thing.
yeah.
Like
And they're
we sometimes I think we tend to take ownership or we make things about ourselves when the entire idea of going to church and worshiping the God we believe in is supposed to be nothing about us.
No, and that's totally fair.
Yeah.
And the closest I can get to understanding is my seats in class.
Oh,
yeah.
Amen.
Just-
I was going to
Right? Because
Okay,
just again, as part of the background in the United Methodist Church, you move a lot.
Yeah.
So I have moved 13, 14, 15, I don't know, some amount of times. I've moved a lot. So I've been to a lot of different churches. So the whole concept of like, this is where I've sat for forever and my family sat here, really foreign to me.
Yeah.
Just because that's not, but Elijah at least stayed in, you didn't really stay in the same church though, but you were in the same area for most of your life.
Yeah. I stayed in the same church for most of my life. I mean, when I was too young to really remember where we were, we may have been bouncing a little more, but for as long as I can remember 2 buildings we were at for my entire upbringing, but those 2 buildings were still the same church. Like our first place was like a public Grange hall, and then after that, a little bit time later, we were able to actually buy a building.
Did you have your seat?
Not really.
No? Oh, see, that's interesting.
We had pews in our church, but for the most part, even if you can separate the idea of like this is my seat or my area, even if you can separate that, it still doesn't. It doesn't overshadow the reality that in school, in church, in any kind of social gathering, that you're going to see patterns of people who sit in certain places. You're going to see groups or cliques or whatever you want to call them. You're going to see like social groups who have their place and who identify with that place. And I think it's normal and it's relatable.
Well,
I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
And that's why, like, for me, the closest I can come is classes.
Yeah.
And again, chronically, I sit in the back. And part of that's because I had a teacher who once told me that the further back you sit, you can actually see grades go down. And he was like, if you sit in front, you get an A. Like, people tend to get A's, then B's, then C's, then D. And so I did not like that somebody assumed that. And so I refused to ever sit in the front again. And I was definitely a nerd and a teacher's pet. I know that's not obvious from how I talk, but
Oh, really?
yeah, I know. It just became my life's mission to sit in the back of all of these classes. Also, I hate people sitting behind me.
Oh, yeah.
I just feel like people are watching me, and I don't know. Which is true in a church, by the way. If people sit behind you, they are watching you.
Not always, but yes.
I mean, I'm just saying, when I sit behind people in church, I'm going to watch them.
Well, see,
I'm watching
the
it.
interesting about that is, like, when I was younger and, like, in my mother's church where she was a pastor, I don't think we had a set spot where any of us kids would sit. Sometimes it was with Dad. Sometimes it was just in there. Sometimes we weren't even in the sanctuary, like in the kids' nursery or whatever, like right nearby, not even looking at things or however. But sometimes when you're a kid sitting in a sanctuary, you'll get the nice old granny who comes and sits behind you and will watch you the entire
Yes.
service.
See, you said nice old granny.
No.
But
when I say that's like her ideal how she would like to be represented.
I know. What I was gonna say is you say that, but your face visualized something other than nice.
You know what, though? Also, just a total random tangent, but my view of like how old those people were who sat behind us to do that has changed so much over time. Because it used to be like, oh,
Right,
it's
right.
always the ancient one. And it'd be like people in their 40s or 50s. And I'm like, oh, I guess I'm getting too close to that for that to be ancient.
So back to this idea of pews.
Yep.
And COVID time, sometimes our pews are becoming our living room seats or anything like that, especially with our online service. I know here we're broadcasting all of our services online. So does where you're coming and sitting for church Sunday morning, if it's not in the sanctuary, is it still a pew?
Well, here's the thing. I inherently have a problem with pew being seen as the place you have to be to worship. So when you say that, I instantly want to be like, this is such a ridiculous concept to me. Of course it's not a pew, because a pew is just an expression of an object. But to some people, that's not the case. And so I kind of like had, when you first said that, I was like, that's so dumb. But now I'm sitting here like, okay, but for some people, that's probably a very legitimate question. Like, is it still considered like a pew? Because pew
can
has
I
this
truly worship from where I am.
because the connotation behind pews now is this is my place where I worship, instead of it being literally just a seat like it is in my head. And I think that really when we read scripture, it says where two or more are gathered, there I am also. And so if God's presence is there, you can worship wherever you are.
Yeah.
You know, and even further, we believe that God sent his spirit to be within all of us. So, well, all who accept him, obviously. But if we believe that, if we truly believe that, doesn't that mean God is with us wherever we go? So wherever we go can be a worship space. It doesn't matter if you're watching at home. It doesn't matter if you're sitting in your family's pew. It doesn't matter if you're kicked out of your family's pew because of the green tape in the sanctuary. But why do you think it becomes so important to people? Like, I guess my question for you guys, because I genuinely have a hard time with that concept of why that would be so important.
It's difficult for me too, because when I think of a pew, I don't think of anything but a bench. I don't think of I don't really view it as any kind of symbol or anything naturally, because even though we had them at our church, they didn't, as much as it possibly like could be different than other churches, you know, like they didn't really matter to me or mean anything to me. They were just seats.
Well, yeah, and I guess for some context, there's a big movement right now in churches, well, prior to COVID, of course, to take out a couple of the back pews and to make them a children's area, where like essentially Andy's making a weird face at me, but
I've never heard or seen anything about
and
this.
so it's sort of the idea is to create an entire space so that way kids who need to play or move have a spot in the service in the sanctuary, so they don't have to leave. And so like part of that is having like padded like those little puzzle pieces that go together, and having soft toys that they can play with so they don't make a ton of noise necessarily and disturb everyone. Well, that's the goal, because they're trying to be respectful as well. But there's a lot of pushback from a lot of churches, because it's like, those are the pews. Those are the pews. That's the sanctuary. That's where pews go.
Yeah, the idea that a sanctuary without pews like doesn't work, or that taking pews away from a sanctuary makes it less, I don't know, sacred. Maybe I'm being over dramatic, but even being the idea that taking away pews from a sanctuary makes it, I don't know, less of a place to worship or harder to worship, or that you're ruining the image or something, is just so weird to me personally. And I mean, if you're talking about seating, I mean, that's a whole nother thing. But I mean, if the idea of getting rid of pews feels like it's some kind of, like you're tainting a sanctuary, or that you're removing something vitally important because it's a church, I guess it kind of just like baffles me a little bit, because I guess I just don't see I don't see the connection between something important in regards to a house of worship and, again, like I said, what I view it as, between that and like a bench with some cushions on it.
Mm-hmm.
That's all it means to me personally.
And I guess
To some people, it is a symbol, though.
Yeah, no, and I'm not, I don't want to.
We all have, like,
Exactly.
no matter what's
that
said.
we attach to it.
Yeah, I'll make it quickly. But when I'm saying I don't get it, I'm not saying like, oh, you're wrong. And I'm trying to keep this mindset throughout anything I'm talking about with this podcast in my life. When I'm saying I don't get it, I should have clarified. I do firmly believe, or I firmly mean that I'm saying it doesn't make sense to me because I just never grew up seeing it that way.
Yeah.
And I know that some people do. And we can talk about whether or not that has some kind of validity or not. But even through that, I'm not even trying to discredit someone's own personal view. I'm only talking about the way that I see it. And I just don't get it.
Yeah.
That's about it.
We are coming to the end of our podcast here. We have about 3 minutes left.
Who knew there was so much to talk about with Pews?
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, we probably could fill up another hour if we tried really hard. I'm going to leave an invitation to those listening, to those who are participating, however you hear our voices. I don't think we have a formal platform that we're posting to yet.
Not yet.
But I'm guessing this will definitely go on YouTube for sure, that people can listen to. Scroll down to the comment section.
Yes.
Let us know your thoughts. Do you have an opinion on a pew? Is there a reason why every Sunday you need your pew to be there? Is that where you find God? Is that where you see him?
And if it is, tell us. Yes. Tell me.
We are very interested
absolutely.
in any opinion that you have. Please feel free. Disagree with us. Fight with us.
100%.
However you want to look at it. This is merely, we're trying to give as much as we can.
Yep.
And hopefully talk about this idea that even though the pews may be where we sit on Sunday, we can still be God in our community, even if we're not sitting down on a wooden bench or a steel chair or whatever your pew is.
100%.
You can find God wherever, and you can preach and you can reach everybody in your community. That's kind of my call out, my push in that direction.
And we'd love to hear, wherever you find God, that is a special place.
100%.
And I think that it's important also to note that we honor that and we respect that. And we do want to hear that. We'd love to hear if you have other funny pew stories. Like, for instance, if you're me and weird and you once painted an entire section of pews for a church camp, feel free. Weird random story. Or my brother actually hurt his foot while we did that. But anyhow, that's a story for another day. We would love to hear from you, so feel free to comment. We'd also love to hear anything that you would like to have us discuss on this podcast. Anybody you'd like to hear from. We would love to have your feedback. Yeah. Let us know through however we end up posting this crazy pilot episode we just did.
And if we could, right before we end, maybe bring everything that we've discussed to the best and maybe the quickest way we can possibly do it. Bring it back to the purpose of this podcast. Why did we just go on an hour and talk about pews and talk about the history of them and relate them to now and relate them to COVID? Like, it's a little hard to put it into words because I think at the core of it all, the three of us, maybe more, maybe less at different times, wanted to just meet, talk about some of the things that we see in church, talk about some of the things in church that we think are really good or could really, really be improved, some of the hurts that the church has done, some of the good the church has done. I think we really just wanted to come together and just talk about the reality of what we see in church. Yep. So I guess I had a purpose of bringing this up. I think I wanted to just bring, if we could, right before we end it, bring it back to why the things that we're asking you maybe to comment on, maybe to tell us your experience with, or to give us ideas of what you want us to talk about. I wanted us to bring this back to why we talk about those things and why those things are important, and what the purpose of this podcast, the podcast that right now we're calling Church is Stupid, what the purpose of you telling a podcast with that name is. Because I would say at my piece, I think that it is important to have honest and personal discussions about the reality of the church right now, because I think that there's a lot of ambiguity that comes with the idea of church, and maybe people who don't know a lot about it, or everyone has their own idea of what it is. Everyone has their own experience with church, and I think all of those experiences and points are valid. But I love the idea of being able to meet and then just talk about something without having any kind of strings attached, without having any kind of, prerequisites, without having any kind of like restrictions. I think that if there's one thing that could help maybe a younger or any generation identify with what we truly believe the good of the church is or could be, it would be honest discussion about anything. And it can be funny. I mean, when we were talking about Pews originally, it was kind of with a laugh, because the idea of talking about Pews is funny in a way. Mm-hmm. Some of the history isn't, but the idea of thinking about, hey, let's start a podcast in our pilot episode. Let's talk about Pews. You can't help but kind of like laugh at it.
Yeah.
But talking about things like that, I think, is important, because I think there needs to be a conversation like that, and we would love to have your input on it, everyone out there, your input or your ideas or anything, because I think that's what I think it's one of the things that we need right now, and we would be happy to offer that to the best that we can.
Absolutely, and we'd love to have you back. But I think that was a great summary, so I'm good. So
I wasn't sure where I was going with it, but that was the idea I wanted to get across.
Yeah.
So
we'll
being
talk
honest,
to you guys next time.
And for all of us here at Church is Stupid, I'm Andrew.
I'm Elijah.
I'm Pastor Ruth.
And we hope that you have a blessed week.
Absolutely. Take care.